Hi, I'm Matthew Leonard. This is the Art of Catholic podcast, and this is kind of a little mini cast that I am doing with my guest, Noelle Mering. We just had a full-on podcast about her book, Awake Not Woke, a Christian response to the cult of progressive ideology. It's published by Tan Books. Fantastic book. It will explain to you where all this stuff is coming from in the progressive movement, the woke movement. Why is it happening, and how to fight against it as well. And I wanted to ask her a separate question, which I found fascinating. And I'm the father of 6 kids, and my kids are in school. And sometimes we homeschool and sometimes we don't. So we're back and forth in the Catholic schools. But one of the sections of the book, Noelle, you mentioned something called idea laundering and its relationship also to the education establishment. Can you explain to us what idea laundering is and why it is we need to be aware of this?
Sure. So idea laundering, it's a term that I can't at the moment recall if Peter Boghossian came up with it or another man whose name escapes me. But the idea basically was that you can sort of advance any kind of, you come up with the correct conclusion, the conclusion that kind of flatters the sensibilities of, the popular ideologies of the time. And you can sort of backtrack your way into making it an acceptable and seemingly valid piece of the canon of intellectual thought. So, for example, there was this sort of an academic prank, but it was done to expose this sort of corruption in the academic world. That was done by James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pleckrose, where they got published a series of fake academic tomes, or not tomes, but journal entries, or studies, where they did, like, for example, they did one about dog rape at Portland dog parks, where they claimed to study that there's this sort of inherent, like, systemic sort of experience of dogs raping each other in Portland dog parks in Portland. It was all fake, but they started with a conclusion and then kind of gave all this evidence. And then they did another one where they took the copy of Mein Kampf, or several passages or chapters of it, and they replaced it all, but with the feminist language. But they imitated almost exactly the sentence structure and the arguments that were in Mein Kampf, and then they submitted it for peer review, and they submitted many of them, and several of them were accepted, and joined the establishment. So basically, what idea laundering is, this idea that you can kind of write something that for peer review that can get into the establishment. And then based on that, then there'll be other things that are pieces that are responding to it. And then there's pretty soon you have this whole canon of things exploring this one topic that was all built on straw. And then people start referencing it. It becomes footnotes. And then, all of a sudden, boom, it comes out clean as snow. This is considered knowledge now, that there are, whatever it is, whatever the conclusion is. So
is this how things get out there so quickly then? Because it seemed like, I remember, words like transgender or, what, in fact, just today I saw a tweet by Luke Burgess, and he said, I've had him on the Art of Catholic, and I think you're friends with him or you know him.
I've met him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a great guy. And he said, he made some reference to some, like, vector. He's like, where did the word vector come from? Like, all of a sudden it's everywhere. And we feel like this with so many different terms that just seem to come out of nowhere. And all of a sudden they're in the vernacular and everybody's using it. Is this how this happens?
That's right. Yeah, no, it's a very similar phenomenon. I mean, I think, intersectionality, privilege, the talk of the word, using privilege as a pejorative, that came out of nowhere. And then if you look, there's studies that have been done where, almost no one is using this language. And then within a year's time, it's just repeated over and over again, all throughout the academy and then into the popular imagination too. And I think that what it really is a sign of how important the manipulation of words are in order to change the way societies think, right? That if we can change people's words, we can change their inner life, their inner thoughts, and the way we communicate, and the assumptions that we have, and the fundamental ways that we filter our perceptions of reality itself. That words can really become tools of manipulation. And so it's interesting because it's both sort of a demeaning of what the importance of language, and also overblowing the importance of language, right? They're so malleable that we can manipulate them at will, but they're so important that they can become like avenues of violence, right? That, your words can, language becomes violence if someone's not speaking correctly. And that's another tool of manipulation. But I think it's connected, because if you can manipulate language to control reality, then someone else not affirming that manipulation of language then becomes a threat to the new reality that you're trying to establish and try to coerce over into other people's inner lives themselves.
So was I conflating something, or did you make some connections in the book between idea laundering and the education establishment and such, with regard to textbooks and ideas that came out? Is this how some of the new, more radical ideas made their way into school books and such, or was I completely off base in in how I analyzed that?
No, I think that absolutely is what happened. I mean, so much of the peer-reviewed academic work done is, even if it's not explicitly in the sort of prank that like James Lindsay pulled with his co-authors, is still ideological in the sense that the conclusion is prior to the method. And that is really consistent with what critical theory is in general, right? That it's not a seeking for truth, it's a seeking for power. And so you want to get the right conclusions out there in order to establish them and make them powerful. And so I think this is what's been going on in academia for decades. And it has a long history. I mean, the ideologues realized early on that to get into the minds of the mental imagination, moral and mental imagination of a society, you have to educate them to become activists. And that if you can establish from K through 12 into college, something that is deeply rooted in this for the purpose of activism, you can change the society very effectively and very powerfully. Because you change our baseline of what we think is real and what we think is true very quickly in that way.
Yeah, and one of the things you trace in the book is how the ideologues focused on the teachers, and people sit back and wonder, why are the teachers' unions so like out there? What are they doing? They seem so opposed to who we are as Catholics and all the rest. But there's a reason why they are so incredibly liberal, because they were focused on and targeted from the very beginning, weren't they?
That's right. I mean, Herbert Marcuse, the Frankfurt School celebrity intellectual, he was a mentor for everyone from Angela Davis to Bill Ayers and a lot of people in the Weather Underground, several of whom went on to become extremely influential, proponents or influential administrators and teachers at places like teachers' colleges. So you would get people from all over, school districts that would come be trained in a teachers' college, and then go out and disseminate the ideology in their localities, so it was top down in that way. It was such an effective way to disseminate ideology, with the idea that we have to get almost sort of a conveyor belt of activism. The schools started to be seen as, how do we get people to think rightly, think with a right consciousness, and to eradicate the false consciousness of the old way, the old objectivity, critical thinking, that sort of old guard. So and they write fairly explicitly about this in a lot of literature. So yeah, there's a lot of wonderful teachers out there, if that needs to be said, of course, that are not this sort of activists. But the schools really have been targeted for quite a while in this way.
Where does John Dewey come in? It was John Dewey, is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember growing up with the Dewey Decimal System, right? I mean, that's how I knew the name. But there's some more to the story there, isn't there?
Yeah, he was a very pivotal person. That he's considered the father of the modern educational system. And he was the one who really facilitated the Frankfurt School coming into America, and he welcomed them, to become sort of adjacent to Columbia University. But he had been on sort of a ideological tourism. He'd gone to the Soviet Union, and he was really taken by the way in which they understood that in order to achieve like a new secular humanist society, you'd had to train children and train them in particular away from sort of the old religious kind of what they would consider provincial values of their families, and that an hour in Sunday school a week cannot hold a candle to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week in an institution that is going to be combating everything that they're learning in that 1 hour. Ideally, obviously, families should not be leaving it up to just 1 hour a week, but you see their point they understood how much power that school system had in that way.
Yeah, that's why it's so frustrating when your kids go to a Catholic school. I hear this from parents all the time. But my kids were in Catholic school. But fundamentally, a lot of those schools are using these secular textbooks, whether it's because of Common Core, state monies, or whatever else, and they're just basically getting the same pablum that are pushed in the state-run schools. What is there that differentiates it? And it's just something that parents need to be really on top of in your schools, and look to not just the overt things, but that kind of underlying philosophy that's present in a lot of what it is that is taught our children, because there's a war on, and they are trying to take the hearts and minds of our children, even in the Disney movies, for crying out loud. I mean, all this listen to your heart stuff. And I saw you mention in the book Elsa, from Frozen. Yeah. As soon as I saw that character, I'm not kidding, I knew exactly where they were going with this.
Yeah,
that she was going to come out. Yeah, it was so obvious, right? That this is the end goal. It was so
obvious.
She's breaking it off. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that immediately. Within 5 minutes, I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize this was a gay pride movie."
Yeah,
right. It's so love is an open door. The trolls are like, was she born this way?
Right.
And then she becomes fabulous, and she sings "No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free." I mean, it's expressive individualism. It's it's got all of the elements of the ideology. And people think you're a paranoid culture warrior if you point this out, but this is just the ubiquity of this message over and over again, that the heroes in society are the societal, freaks, or the X-Men, or the, your nonconformity is the sign of your heroism. And there's a place for that message where it's healthy. You're born with a weird nose or a funny sense of humor, or you're quirky and you've got quirky hair. Great, embrace it. That's beautiful. But the sheer ubiquity of this message over and over again, and the way in which it's used as defiance of the sort of social conventions of the society, as though those are the things that are repressive rather than oriented towards our flourishing and freedom. It's obviously agendized. And why wouldn't it be? Of course, if I were a Christian working in Hollywood, I wouldn't be inserting messages of heroism and, virtue and, courage and all these things. They're going to be trying to evangelize in the opposite way. So the children are particularly targeted in this way, because insofar as children maintain sort of a perpetuation of a social norm that is old, because the children naturally have it, or they're naturally innocent. They naturally think it's kind of weird if men dress up as women, or, they kind of, implicitly, they become, in the words of the ideology, perpetuators of the dominance of this, of social, of the moral law, which they want to refute. Sorry. And so children have to become indoctrinated, because insofar as they don't accept, or they do have this natural inclination towards kind of, bodily meaning and all these things, they become a signpost to something that is transcendent, a signpost to authority, a signpost to objectivity, signpost to something that's a higher moral order. And so they have to be indoctrinated in order to disabuse themselves of all of that, those instincts, in order to perpetuate this idea that there is no order to be had.
And this goes back to what you and I were talking about at the end of our full podcast on your book. And that is the fundamental way that we would fight against this is our families. Like, we have to protect our children. If we happen to be watching something in my house where this is manifesting itself, I will point this stuff out, and this is only if it's something I'm not even letting them watch, right? But I'll point it out, and you see, where this is going? This is what they're really saying by this. And so my kids have become tuned into this by pointing some of these things out. And I think that's really important to do, because they need to understand that they are being targeted in a lot of different ways. And we're all being targeted, right? Through whatever media and all the rest of it. They've got all of these channels of media, and it's actually insidious. And you can start to repeat this stuff and not even realize that you're basically repeating the mantra of the ideology in very innocuous ways, and you can get sucked into this without knowing. So you need to understand what this is all about and where it's all going. And again, that's why I highly recommend you guys grab this book by Noelle, because it's just really a fantastic unpacking of where it comes from, where it's going, and you end it by talking about how it is we fight against it all. So again, kudos to you, Noelle. It's a fantastic, fantastic book, and I applaud you, because I know it had to have taken a lot of work to put this together. And I'm really pleased with TAN that they put this out. And I really hope that you continue to produce more works along these lines. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks so much, Matthew. That was wonderful to talk to you, and you're a great interviewer and a great host, and I'm so glad to be exposed to your podcast, and I hope people are following it and listening to you widely and broadly and more. So thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thanks be to God, and may we grow in holiness, and guys, and that really is the fundamental way that we fight all this. We grow in holiness. We seek Jesus Christ, and at the end of the day, He wins. And if we're conformed to Him, we're part of His mystical body. Guess what? We win too. So, God bless you. Thanks again, Noelle.
Amen. Thank you.